it's very, very important that you understand what is going on. We look at politics in the world, particularly in Canada, and we're lucky, we're safe. Look, whichever party wins, we have a civilized nation. We have a civil service that generally is not corrupt. We have a police that will, by and large, respect the individual. It's a wonderful place in which to live. We're speaking about a part of the world where anarchy has turned into oppression, and Christians in particular are being targeted. So please read this book, understand the situation, and the next step is to act on that situation in whatever way you can. It may just be a donation to an organization, it may be a letter to your MP, it may be speaking to a friend, but please do get involved in this. The anecdotes, the stories, I mean, I've met, I just want to, this, I mean, it seems so trivial compared to what you've experienced, but I was on a subway in Toronto, TTC, and I'm recognized a bit, and there was a fellow, it was an empty compartment, and he was across from me. He was big and quite young. You know, if they're old and small, I feel really okay. But he was, and I could tell he was Middle Eastern. And he looked, his face, and he got up and started to walk towards me. And I thought, this could be fun, because I've written quite a bit about this issue. And as he got closer, I saw there was a crucifix around his neck. And he just put his arms around me and began weeping and said, thank you for speaking out. And I do so little. But these people, they change your life. They are so humble, they're so undemanding, but they've suffered so very much.
Yeah, they do, they take you in.
Yeah.
You know, I began talking and writing about this because when I became aware of it, I just had to do it. And so actually I was kind of thrown into it. I wrote one article for a news site I regularly write for, and the article was shared over 50,000 times on Facebook within 24 hours. And all of a sudden, I'm a global spokesperson on the issue, and I'm being invited to go to Congress and to sign this and to do that and to speak for these people. And I believe that knowledge is a stewardship, and stewardship requires action. And so God in his providence decided to make me a voice for these brothers and sisters in Christ. And I just decided I would raise my voice for them the way I hope someone would do for me, and that I would pray for them the way I hope someone would pray for me. And so I just put it in my heart that if no one else on planet Earth was going to tell their story and going to speak up for them, have the courage to do it, right? I mean, I was going to do that. It was my responsibility, and it has utterly changed my life, because what I've discovered is that the Christianity of the book of Acts, the Christianity that cost you something, the Christianity where carrying a cross meant life or death, it wasn't a club that you're part of or community that you associate with, that Christianity is alive and well in the Middle East. And, well, as the Archbishop of Mosul told me, as he described how ISIS bombed the tomb of Jonah in the city of Mosul, and with this look of defiance in his eyes, which is, by the way, why I wrote the book Defying ISIS. This look of defiance in his eyes, he told me, when they bombed that tomb, they inadvertently uncovered the ruins of a church we didn't even know existed, because the gates of hell will never prevail against the church.
My goodness me. They can destroy the buildings, they can kill people. They can't destroy Christianity. It will always be there. But the reality is the number of Christians has been reduced enormously. Now, some will go back, but many will leave for other countries. God willing, they'll be able to get out, and they'll build a life and they won't return. And even if we save the Christians who are left, we could still see a region where what was a thriving church is now just the detritus of a former great Christian culture.
And isn't this a shame? I mean, we would have no Christianity in the West if it wasn't for Christians in the East. We would have no church history in the West if it wasn't for the church history of the East. I mean, these aren't communities that are separated from us. These are the communities that incubated our own faith.
Yep.
I mean, Paul was converted on the road to Damascus. Christians were first called Christians in Antioch.
Oh, the New Testament was written in Asia Minor, really, in Turkey and much of the Islamic world.
This isn't the peripheral of the body of Christ. This is the heart of it. And ISIS isn't beginning a genocide against Christians. They're finishing something which has been happening for a very, very long time, and we do not have the luxury of not being educated on it and not raising our voices any longer.
Now, I'm always reluctant to get involved in party politics, but the reality is the United States is the great superpower. There's an election, there will be an election. Will it matter which party wins, who becomes president? I spoke to Ted Cruz. I mean, a lot of his policies aren't mine, but I spoke to him in DC briefly. I was impressed with his position, at least on this issue.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a foreign policy election in the United States. I don't think anybody on Capitol Hill imagined the situation that we're in now. I mean, just think at the beginning of the Arab Spring, where America was behaving in this sort of idealism that somehow these
How naive.
countries would come into this sort of gleaming stability and progress. And what we've seen in the last few years is a total travesty. I mean, we've seen a total disaster. We've seen instability trade its place for stability. We've seen innocent people killed in the most horrific ways, and we see no plan for the region whatsoever. I would say, Republican or Democrat in the United States, there is no clear plan for the Middle East. And so one of my goals, in terms of my own awareness raising, because I believe we ought to do a few things. Number one, we ought to pray for these people. Paul wrote a prayer to the Church of Thessalonica. He said, pray that we might be delivered from wicked and evil people. I'm praying that every day. Number two, we have to educate ourselves. We have to know what's happening in the region. We have to tell the stories, and they're not easy to get. That's why I wrote them down in the book, so people could know them and tell them. Thirdly, we have to provide humanitarian assistance, because the United Nations is right when they say this is the worst humanitarian crisis of our modern time. We have to provide help to every organization. I don't care which one, whichever one you know is helping these displaced people provide. But number four, we have to put unrelenting pressure on government to pay more attention and to do more. And my goal in the United States of America, and I think it ought to be the goal of every Canadian citizen in this country, is to make sure that every single politician has to look in a camera or look across the table from a reporter and has to answer a question. And the question is, what are you doing to save the lives of religious minorities in the Middle East? What are you doing? Not what is your party doing or what your prime minister, your president is doing, but what are you doing? And the reporters will only ask the questions, and the politicians will only pay attention if we raise our voices.
We've said it before, but I want to say it again. This is not about attacking Islam. The vast majority of the world's Muslims despise what ISIS are doing, but we have to be realistic about who the people are who are committing these terrible crimes. There is something, ironically, gloriously ecumenical about the nature of victimhood. Catholic, Orthodox of various aspects of Orthodoxy, Anglican, Evangelical, all sorts of Christians. ISIS don't say, well, are you Roman Catholic or are you Eastern Rite? Or we kill you because you love Jesus Christ. That's why they do it. And it's a reminder of who and what we are.
In fact, when you watch, and I would discourage anyone from watching them, but when you watch the videos of the executions of these Christians, in every single circumstance, the executioner makes it very clear, totally crystal clear, that these men that have been killed mainly, that we have documentation of the beheadings of the Egyptian Coptics and of the Ethiopian Orthodox, these men were given a choice: convert, pay the tax, or die. And they didn't choose to deny Jesus Christ. It appeals to us. 2,000 years of Christian history, 2,000 years of Christians that have been stoned and beheaded and burned alive for Jesus Christ appeals to us as modern Christians. Why are we barely willing to live for what these brothers and sisters are so willing to die for? I remember when I arrived in Iraq in October to assess the situation for myself, I immediately asked that they took me to the refugee camps, so they would take me there. And I arrived at these refugee camps, and all I saw were tents going on and on and on, in the most deplorable conditions you can imagine. But you know what I saw? On tent after tent, I saw crosses. Because these Christians had nearly lost everything. In fact, they had lost everything in many circumstances and nearly lost their lives for one reason: that cross. The video of the beheading of the Coptic martyrs and the video of the beheading and the execution of the Ethiopian Orthodox, the 30 and the 21, both of those videos were written as a message to the nation of the cross. And yet when you go to these refugee camps and you meet these people, you discover the one thing they won't do is raise their cross any less high, because they are not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the beautiful thing is, not only are you seeing the ecumenism of this crisis, the ecumenism of blood is what Pope Francis has called it, but you're seeing Muslims and Yazidis and people of all other types of faith and religions around the world that feel the threat of these maniacs pulling together against their common enemy, because the best of faith is the secret to defeating the worst of religion. Now we just need to get to it.
Yeah. The blood of the martyrs. It is something I believe we would never see. I didn't know it could get this bad. But by the way, we should just define one thing. You mentioned tax a few times in the interviews. This is not only ISIS. Orthodox Islam does say that people of the book, including Christians, will be tolerated but have to pay a tax. And 1,500 years ago, 1,400 years ago, many Christians were impoverished by this, and in the end they did become Muslims simply because they couldn't pay it anymore. So that's Orthodox Islam. I think probably the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, believe that. Many other Muslims do as well. So ISIS is the worst manifestation of all this, but Islamism is broader than that, and it's influential today.
Yeah, for sure it is. I mean, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia famously said a couple of years ago that there shouldn't be a church in the entire Arabian Peninsula. I mean, this is true, and it's factual that we have to, once we put down this barbarism, we have to grow up into a certain sensibility of the entire world. And I'll tell you, I'm a Christian, and I'm as committed to my Christianity as anything else, but I'm committed to religious freedom, and I will fight for that freedom for every Muslim and every Buddhist and every Hindu in the world, but it needs to be reciprocal. And I think it's a shame to the modern world that you can't believe in Jesus Christ publicly in so many of these countries around the world, and you can't have a church in so many of these regions of the world. The lesson of ISIS is how far this can go if it isn't checked early enough.
The book again, Defying ISIS by Johnny Moore. Please, please get hold of several copies. Give them to your friends. It's been a week. It's been a privilege, my friend, my brother. Thank you very much indeed. Bless you.
Thank you for having me.